Hello and welcome to another session on appreciating poetry. Let's continue from where we stopped. We had discussed in detail, not in detail, a brief discussion, of course, of Elizabethan period. Or say from Henry VII onwards, you can see the beginning of Renaissance, the early Renaissance. In, of course, Henry VIII, it is more prominent, and Queen Elizabeth. So now the poetry of Renaissance has all the freshness and vigor of youthful race. You know what Renaissance is, Renaissance or Renaissance. You can pronounce it any way you like. Some pronounce it as Renaissance, some as Renaissance, some as Renaissance. So anyhow, it was the revival of learning which began in Italy, and the classical texts were revived. They started exploring the classical writers, and a love for classical art, literature, painting, and all developed. So it was indeed a period that which began in various parts of Italy and Germany, and soon spread to the other parts of Europe. So the poetry of Renaissance has all the freshness and vigor of a youthful race. It spread far and wide across Europe. The love for classical literature and art and culture is what we call the revival of learning, or the Renaissance. Thus the 15th century dawned upon an England that had outlived the energizing idealism of the 12th century. It was different, and with the dawn of Renaissance, slowly things began to change. The country that had been paralyzed by wasteful futilities of the 100 Years' War. You will be studying about the 100 Years' War that was fought between England and France. So England was always, they were busy with the wars. And of course, with that also you had the Civil War going on, not just the 100 Years' War. And after that you have the Civil War, that is the Civil War, that is the war within England, the war between the two houses, the House of York and House of Lancaster. That is a civil war. And then you have the 100 years, or before that you have the 100 Years' War that was fought between France and England. And with England becoming with England defeating France, England got all the power, and nationalism began to spread. They drove away the French from England, and all that you will be studying, the 100 Years' War. And now another thing that I want to tell you was the reason why. Maybe you may not find that in your history textbook, but that's an interesting fact. Okay, the reason as to why the French, they are very good at archery, and the English too, of course. But the reason as to why the English won is because the English troops, they used long arrows, okay, whereas the French, they used crossbows. Okay, and the problem with crossbows is that it would only travel a short distance, and therefore could kill maybe one or two at an instance. But the long arrows, on the other hand, would travel at a long distance, and it can kill not just one person, perhaps three or more at one shot. So this is one reason as to why the English forces won the 100 Years' War. The last war was the war of Battle of Agincourt. Now this war, the 100 Years' War, can be divided into three. The Battle of Crécy, which was fought in 1346, the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, and the Battle of Agincourt in 1450, where the English won. Okay, and they established their power in England, that is, they got back their country and drove away the French. Okay, so that was over. The 100 Years' War is over. All that wasteful futilities that in the war is all dissolved. Now Henry VII comes back to the throne. He takes over, and there begins the Tudor dynasty. So you have another very important aspect of this is this age, this period between 1400 and 1550. There's also it is very important in history because you find the arrival of the printing press. The first printing press, not in England, in Europe, was that of Johannes Gutenberg. You have studied that, right? Now, this helped the spread of Reformation as well as Renaissance throughout Europe. So, Reformation, don't think that Reformation began only in England. It began all over Europe as such. Okay, and in England, that is in 1476, the printing press was started in England by William Caxton. Okay, so this resulted, again, Renaissance is the revival of learning, right? So the spread of books, earlier books were handwritten, they were expensive, they were time consuming, but now with the advent of the printing press, it was made more easily available. So therefore, learning spread far and wide. The Italy Renaissance, if you are to describe the Renaissance in Italy, you can say that the Italy Renaissance thrills through the senses. The peculiarity of the Italian revival of learning, or their literature, was thrills through the senses. In Germany, it speaks through the intellect. That you have to remember. I want you to bear this in mind. In Italy, it thrills through the senses. It was more of the senses. And in Germany, it was more to do with the intellect. Okay? And Italy and Germany was like, where was on fire. You can say that while Italy was on fire, with the new sunrise, it was still for England merely a streak upon the horizon. So it was yet, England was yet to be, to come or to make its mark in Renaissance literature. Okay, Italy and Germany was like, they were very much influenced by Renaissance. It began there, it spread far and wide. It did reach England, but it was still just the beginning only. Now, the birth of Tudor dynasty, as I told you, the 100 Years' War. After that, they drove away the French. And then you have the civil wars, the House of York and House of Lancaster. Both these houses, the civil war was resolved, and who was the person behind it? Henry VII, the person or the one responsible for the birth of Tudor dynasty. The King of England, the Tudor King of England. Now he encouraged new learning. Several literature or literary works from France and from French and Spanish were translated into English. And after you will be studying all this in history also, the merging of the two houses, the houses of the House of Lancaster and the House of York. Henry the seventh marries into the House of York. Okay, and he therefore his marriage dissolves this civil war, and thus you find peace and prosperity, and new learning was encouraged. So there was no wars, people had more time, creativity started to spread. Okay, people did not they were not engaged in war. So when you are engaged in a war, it is a time of disruption, it is a time of chaos and calamity. Art and literature does not progress or does not flourish at that time, right? So whereas when there is peace and calmness, there is a flourish, your creative ideas come out. So likewise here you find creativity blooming. And also with the beginning of Renaissance in England, it was like spreading slowly it was spreading. Yet you have to wait till Queen Elizabeth's period for the Renaissance. In fact, not Queen Elizabeth as such, Philip Sidney comes in there. Once it comes into the hands of Philip Sidney, a Renaissance, a period, the new literature starts to bloom. Okay, it does bloom, begins with Yacht and Surrey, but then it was all experimental. It was just the beginning. So you can't say that the performance level was very good. You have to wait till Philip Sidney for it to actually begin. Okay, not begin, flourish, bloom. So next person after Henry VII, the next in line is the very famous and very notorious Henry VIII. Henry VIII had 6 wives. 3 he beheaded, 1 died of natural cause, or she died of fever, some ailment, and 2 were divorced. Okay, the first one, that is Catherine, his first wife was Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess, and she was actually the wife of Henry VII's eldest son. There are people who say that they were just engaged, but there are also in history it is also said that they got married but lived only for say 6 months or 5 months together. The eldest son, Henry's eldest son, he died, and to keep that ties with Spain, otherwise Spain would invade England, to keep that ties with Spain, to maintain peace, Henry VII urged his Henry VII urged his son Henry VIII to marry his sister-in-law, that is Catherine of Aragon. Okay, the Spanish queen, no, sorry, the Spanish princess, to maintain peace. Okay, now, so this marriage was out of compulsion, but they lived happily. Okay, you cannot say that nothing, all was not well, or it was okay, all was well in the beginning. Say for few years, maybe say 10, 8, 9 years or so, they lived peacefully. They had a daughter, Mary, the notorious Queen Mary, who would later be called Bloody Mary, who was responsible for the widespread massacres of several Protestants. Okay, so they got married, but King Henry, he was like a playboy kind of a person, and later, since Catherine of Aragon, his wife, she couldn't give him an heir to the throne. She had several miscarriages after Princess Mary. After their daughter was born, Mary was born, she had several miscarriages and she couldn't give him a son. And not just that, she was elder to Henry VIII. And by the time there were later, soon she reached, or she was beyond the childbearing stage also, and things started to, or problems and troubles started to spring up between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. He wanted to pack her and send her back to Spain. He wanted a divorce. Why am I saying all this? This is because it is very important. You will find the Glorious Revolution beginning. The beginning of the fight for the sole authority over the church. Okay. Now, Henry VIII wanted a divorce, but the Church of England was at that time under the control or authority of whom? Authority of the Pope. Okay, and in Catholicism, it is a taboo. Divorce is a taboo. It is against the Christian principles, and therefore Pope denied, or he rejected this plea from Henry VIII, and Henry VIII is agitated. He is angry, and he wants to go for a second marriage. And what does he do? He proclaims the Church of England as or he proclaims that the Church of England is no longer under the control of the Pope, and that it is the king who would be the head of the Church of England. There's a war, or a kind of not a war, there is a fight, a revolution beginning, the Glorious Revolution, of course, and Henry VIII wins, and he proclaims himself the head of the church. So now, being the head of the church, he can grant himself what? His own divorce. That's one reason. Another reason is, whatever is the wealth, everything needn't now go to Rome. It stays within the country. Earlier, it was like they had to pay a heavy tax. Another thing, all the wealth, etc., should be given, or will be under the control of the Pope. But now, with the king as the head of the church, every wealth, everything in the treasury would stay in England itself, and England started to become powerful and rich. Okay, so two very important things happened here. And Henry VIII divorces his wife, packs her back to Spain along with her daughter Mary. Now, this has hurt Mary a lot. She was very much revengeful. She hated her father for all that he had done to her mother. So that's one reason. Another thing which is connected with this is, these are all very important because British history and English literature go hand in hand. Okay, so just listen to it patiently. Okay, and then we'll get to your topic. So she is packed back to Spain. This has a connection with the later Spanish War, the Spanish Armada, which Queen Elizabeth had to fight. Okay, and she won the battle against Spain. Now, so Catherine of Aragon is sent back to Spain. The Spanish people are angry with England, okay, and her own daughter, Henry VIII's own daughter, that is Queen Mary, is waiting for a chance. Not Queen Mary, Princess Mary is waiting for a chance to take revenge over what has been done. Now, she's angry. One, she will be raised as a Catholic. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, Spain is actually a Catholic, predominantly Catholics. So now Queen Mary is going to be, or Princess Mary is going to be, or is raised as her mother. Since her mother is a Catholic, she's going to be raised as a Catholic. Another thing, till it was it till the departure of the Church of England from Pope, it was also a Catholic country. Okay, England was predominantly a Catholic country. It was only when Henry VIII started, of course, Reformation started in Europe. Protestantism actually started earlier, but then King Henry VIII, once he removes the church from the from the authority of the Pope, becomes a Protestant Anglican church. So Queen Princess Mary, once she's back, Princess Mary, she lives with her mother in Spain. She is brought up as a Catholic. She has hatred for Protestants. Okay, she hates the Protestants. She wants to take revenge against her father also. That these things are very important. Okay, and Henry marries. Queen Elizabeth is the child of his second marriage, and then of course, he has 6 wives. All that you will be studying. So, with that, let me quickly come to Henry VIII's death. Once he dies with just one heir to the throne, and that too a sickly child. He could only rule for say 4 or 5 years, and with that he also dies. And thus Queen Mary, who is also the rightful heir to the throne of England, she takes over, and she her rule is in fact one of the bloodiest rule England perhaps may have witnessed, because there was a widespread massacre of the Protestants. Protestants were killed. Her revenge, her hatred for her father, her hatred for Protestants, because she considers them responsible for her mother's ill fate and also her ill fate, and she murders, or she executes several innocent people. So in fact, and that is why she's termed as Bloody Mary. After her death, now she also dies. She dies due to certain ailment, fever, and she is married. Remember another thing, she is married to a Spanish prince, Prince Philip. Okay, she's married to a Spanish prince, and she is a Catholic, and her husband is also a Catholic. So when she comes to England, which is a Protestant country, and takes over the charge as a queen, the Protestants hate her, and they also fear, they are also afraid of her, because they are killed, they are being executed in large number. So once with the death of Queen Mary, Prince Philip, the Spanish prince, he had to go back to his country. Okay, he had to go back to Spain. Now, then you have Queen Elizabeth coming to the throne, who is also the daughter of King Henry VIII, the second daughter after Queen Mary, and Queen Elizabeth restores peace in England. She has seen the ups and downs of her father. She has seen the weakness as well as the powerful, his positive things that he has done. She has also studied from her grandfathers, from the history. She has studied how her grandfather maintained the treasury, how and also she had all the qualities, the warrior qualities of her father, King Henry VIII. Okay, and she knew that she had to keep both the Catholics and the Protestants to her under her control. So therefore she was a diplomatic queen, and thus you see that there is a lot of peace, there is a lot of prosperity, and this is in fact the golden period of literature, the golden period of poetry as such. Okay, especially that of sonnet. So that's what I'm coming to, sonnets. All right. And as I told you, the Spanish Armada. Now Prince Philip, he's gone back to his country, Spain. His wife was Queen Mary. She died. He tries to propose Queen Elizabeth, with that feeling of getting back back England. And the Spanish people also feels that, okay, Queen Mary is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, married to the Spanish prince, and therefore England is their property. That was their feeling. That was their kind of feeling. So they were waiting for a chance to invade and attack England and annex it with their or with Spain, or to make it their country. But the English people, they hated the Spanish people, and with Queen Elizabeth in power, the English fleet defeats the Spanish Armada and peace established. People loved or started to take Queen Elizabeth as their hero. She was their beloved queen. Okay. And thus nationalism, the feeling of nationalism begins to spread. And also, just like her grandfather Henry VII and also Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth also favored learning. And you find the flourishing of poetry, the blooming of poetry during this period, which was in fact had lost its vigor somewhere after Chaucer. Now you find it revived, okay, and also the spread of Renaissance all around Europe was like it gave a kind of impetus to this kind of to this spirit, and poetry began to bloom. Okay, so the poetry that came to England was the sonnet. Okay, Henry VIII's period itself. You can start from Henry VIII's period. You will find Yacht and Surrey. I told you about Yacht and Surrey. Thomas Yacht and Henry Howard, who is the Earl of Surrey. They were both diplomats, or in the correct term it would be esquire to the king. So they were diplomats. They went to Italy for on diplomatic mission. They came across this Petrarchan sonnet. They fell in love with the Petrarchan sonnet, brought it to England. All these were like we discussed this in the first semester. Do you remember, in Sonnet 29? So they brings back or they bring along with them, they bring the sonnet form, the Petrarchan sonnet form to England. They introduce it to England. Now the sonnet, again going back a little to the history of sonnets, the sonnet began or was introduced, and it began to take shape as a special metrical form under Fra Arezzo, an Italian poet, and it was Petrarch and Dante, the famous poet Petrarch and Dante, who perfected this and crowned this with beauty and power. Okay, and when it reached the hands of Yacht and Surrey, it became a powerful structure in England, and it was still fresh and new, and therefore it was like more or less like an experiment, but in the hands of Philip Sidney it became sweet as nectar. Now again, what was introduced in England by Yacht and Surrey was the Petrarchan form. We are yet to come to the English form. So the Shakespearean version or the English sonnet, Petrarchan sonnet is also called the Italian sonnet. Okay, the Shakespearean version or the otherwise called the English sonnet, which is a divergence, which is a small divergence from Italian form, was introduced not by Shakespeare. Shakespeare was influenced by this and he popularized it, and therefore it is known under Shakespeare's name, the English sonnet. Okay, but it was actually introduced by Daniel and Drayton. Okay, the two poets, Daniel and Drayton. We also have another version of the sonnet, that is a Spenserian sonnet, which was introduced by Edmund Spenser, and several writers were influenced by him. So much for the history, a lot of history, we covered a lot of history. I hope I haven't confused you. I hope you have at least got the gist of what I want to tell you, because Elizabethan period is all about the Tudor dynasty, the Renaissance, the Reformation, these three very important events. And also you have in between, in England you have the Glorious Revolution, where there is a break from the Church of England, which was under the Rome, the Catholic Church, to the Anglican Church. Okay, and then because peace was restored, because England became powerful and rich, once breaking away from the Catholic authority, the wealth stayed within the country. They were very powerful under the king, and also the new queen, which is Queen Elizabeth. Peace was restored. England became a powerful country under Queen Elizabeth. It became a maritime country. Okay, and explorations and colonization also begins at that time. So it has become powerful. Art and literature flourished. And the sonnet form is brought to England from Italy by Yacht and Surrey, Thomas Yacht and the Earl of Surrey, who is Henry Howard. Both of them bring it to England. And it was published in which collection of poems? It was called the Tottel's Miscellany. Okay, Tottel's Miscellany. And we discussed that in the previous video. And then there was a lot of things to be done in that structure. It was not a perfect form, the Petrarchan structure. They brought it, they made little changes in the Petrarchan structure. Both Yacht and Surrey made several changes, tried to make several changes in the Petrarchan structure as such. So you can call it an experimental version. It was yet to be perfected. Okay, and under the hands of Philip Sidney, it became sweet as nectar. And then you have Shakespearean sonnet, which was actually brought, or that divergence, it is a divergence from the usual sonnet form, the Petrarchan sonnet form. And this was introduced by whom? Daniel and Drayton. Okay, and this was greatly used by whom? By Shakespeare. So the English sonnet, which was introduced by Daniel and Drayton, was later renamed Shakespearean sonnet because Shakespeare popularized it in his sonnets. Okay, I hope that much is clear to you. Now, so the history is almost done. The history part is almost done. Now let's move on to the sonnet form. I want you to recollect what you learned in the the first semester video. What is a sonnet? Now these are the questions for you. I'm not going to answer. We'll pick it up in the next video. But for your, when we do our interactions, I'm not going to give you questions. This is the questions. The questions are in the video itself. So the first question is, what is a sonnet? Okay. Secondly, how is it different from the Petrarchan sonnet? Thirdly, what is the stanzaic structure of Shakespearean or English sonnet? Okay, I'm not going to ask you questions in the WhatsApp group. This is the questions for you. Okay, these are the questions for you. All right, so till we meet again, thank you and keep safe.